I'm Matthew Tyler, I'm a paranormal investigator, and I run the website hauntedauckland.com, the website administrator. It's the largest paranormal website in New Zealand. I've been interested in paranormal since I was a kid. I used to sort of get books out of the school library on sort of the unknown and things like this. They always have that section at the start of the Dewey Decimal numbers that had all the paranormal stuff in it. And so I sort of read through all those that I could find, and even probably when I was sort of 11 or 12, I used to go with a friend. We lived near the Paranormal Cemetery, which is the second largest cemetery in Auckland, and we used to go sort of ghost hunting, which was basically just wandering around in the afternoon, wandering around the graveyard, looking for interesting gravestones. It's not like there was a reputation that place had any ghosts floating around it or anything like that, but we felt we were ghost hunting at that age, and so and then for years I really didn't do anything with it, and then I was sort of thinking about finding a hobby. Basically, it's like, well, what did I enjoy doing when I was a child, and is that something I can do as a hobby? Well, I thought, well, I had the paranormal stuff back when I was a kid, so maybe that's something I could look up. So I looked up to see whether there was any groups active in New Zealand. There was one or two at the time, but I sort of asked around, and no one was looking for members or anything like that. And then Mark saw that I posted a message on a website looking to join the group, and he sent me a message on Facebook and said, "Hey, I'm starting up a group." That was back in 2011, and so we went off and did an investigation out Howick, at the Howick Historical Village. Went through a few places there, and that's sort of where we sort of started Haunted Auckland, built up the website and the online presence, and sort of everything took off from there. I'm a paranormal skeptic, so I don't necessarily believe that ghosts are a thing that exists in this world as such. So I'm looking for evidence of that, because there's been, throughout time, people have said, well, look, there's ghosts going right back for thousands of years, back to ancient sort of Rome. There's stories of haunted houses and that kind of stuff. So there's definitely something there, and what I'm trying to find out is what that is. I don't necessarily believe that ghosts are the spirits of the dead, but I believe that all these people have had all these experiences, and I'm trying to understand what it is that they're experiencing, whether it is, as people believe, it's the spirits of the dead, or whether it's something different, whether it's something that to do with the way that we perceive the world. So I come at it from a skeptical angle rather than saying that everything is caused by ghosts. I come from it on the other side to say, well, we've got to rule out what else it could be before the ghosts are the last thing that it would be at the end of a very long list of things that could possibly be. So one of the terms for that is not paranormal but xenonormal. Xenonormal is things that are misinterpreted in your surroundings. So you hear a sort of something knocking on a wall, and some would say that it was a ghost communicating. Other people might say, well, look, it's been a hot day and it's now night time, the building's cooling down, the boards are shrinking, and that makes knocking and tapping noises within the structure of the building. So just because that's not something that a person who hasn't been to the building may not understand that that's possible to happen here, they would attribute it to something paranormal because they've had no experience of this happening in this building before. So that's kind of the kind of stuff that I'm looking for. Contacting ghosts is interesting. It's because there's no sort of proven method to say that this is the way that it works. It's basically trying to, I mean, from my perspective, when I do my ghost hunting, I'm not so much trying to interact with spirits. I'm trying to record the environment and to see what happens naturally, whether that's in the presence of people being there or not. So my idea of an investigation would be to set up cameras everywhere to record video, set up audio devices to record audio, devices to measure the atmospheric temperature, humidity, pressure, even sort of atmosphere composition, gases, that kind of stuff, set up equipment like that if it's available, and measure that over an extended period of time to see what things look like under normal circumstances compared to when someone experiences a ghost. In the experience of ghosts, we'd then be looking for changes in the atmosphere, changes in electromagnetic fields, changes in temperature, visual and audio anomalies that occur that coincide with the person having a paranormal experience. And that would corroborate that their experience is not just something that they're perceiving themselves, but something that can be recorded by third-party instruments in the same vicinity. So that's what I'm looking for in an investigation. What do I think about ghosts? Well, my personal belief is that the paranormal is a reaction the human mind has to certain conditions and certain stimulus. So if you believe that a location is haunted, then potentially you will experience paranormal activity there. There's certain types of places that come up quite often as being haunted. When you look at places like jails and hospitals, asylums, schools, there's a certain type of architecture to them, institutional architecture, I like to call it, where they have big long corridors and lots of doors, and there's that type of sort of setup seems to trigger something within people to make them feel spooked out. There are certain influences that we know interact with the human body, so exposure to high electromagnetic fields and exposure to low frequency sound can cause people to feel uncomfortable and feel like they're being watched and feel like there's a presence nearby. And so those types of things can cause people to believe that a place is haunted. Ghosts are largely something we generate inside ourselves, inside our minds. It's our way that as a human, how we perceive the environment. We are hardwired from our ancient ancestors when we were sort of apes in the savannah walking around looking for threats. And we, as a children, we fix onto faces. We recognise our family, we recognise our mother. So it's hardwired into our genes, the ability to see faces. So if we see something out of the corner of our eye that we didn't quite see in our forward vision, we see something peripherally, often that triggers a threat response within us, and that makes us feel spooked, basically. And particularly in the dark, humans are not good at seeing things in the dark. So that's why a lot of ghosts seem to happen in the dark, because your vision is set up looking for threats even when you don't realise it. And because you may see something that your brain cannot fully perceive with your senses, so it's something that you haven't quite seen. You've seen it out of the corner of your eye, or you've heard something you didn't quite, it wasn't quite loud enough for you to understand, but that all gets filtered through your brain. All your perceptions filter through your brain, and that perception gets filtered by your past experiences, and so you start attributing things based on your past experience and your belief to what you saw but didn't quite perceive, or what you heard and didn't quite perceive, and that's where you hear a voice and it sounds like a voice saying a name, or saying hello, or whispering get out, or something like that. Or you'd see a fleeting something, whether it be sort of something out of the corner of your eye, and it would look like a face, and so you'd assume that it's a person, but you know that a person couldn't be there. So what's a person who's not there? Well, that's a ghost. So that's what I think a lot of what people see is basically the human reaction to things that they don't fully understand is happening. Now, by another definition, that is very much what a ghost is something that we don't understand. So it's not to say that there aren't ghosts, it's just to say I don't agree that the ghosts are necessarily something that is not part of us. My first hunt, it was one of my first or second ones, was actually at the Howick Historical Village. There's a building there which is the Eckford's homestead, and I'd set up a recorder in there, and it had been sitting there. We left the recorder sitting there, and we'd walked away from the building and came back to it later, and just as we were approaching or coming back to the building, the recorder picked up a voice on the recording. And it's difficult to say what it was. It's like a hoarse whisper noise that was picked up. And it definitely wasn't the voices of any of the people who were on the investigation, but that the voice seemed to be saying something like white dress was what we interpreted, or something very similar to that. But the room that it was in, there was no white dress. There was a blue dress on the on a dummy that was sitting in one of the rooms. And so we asked the administrators there, and they said, "Oh, well, normally there is a white dress in that room, but we'd recently just changed it to the blue one." So it's interesting the fact that there was a white dress at some point in that room, and it sounded like the voice was asking about the white dress. We didn't know that there was a white dress there, so it wasn't any of us commenting on it. But something was commenting, potentially, or sounded like it was commenting on where's the white dress. Have I proven anything yet? It's very difficult to prove the paranormal, because so much of it comes down to the belief of the person who's perceiving it. So while you could see something tonight that you would say, yes, that's a ghost, but have no way of backing that up, no proof other than what you saw yourself, then you would believe that you saw a ghost. And I can't say that no, you didn't. I can't prove that you didn't see a ghost, but then again, you can't prove to me that you did. So proof kind of goes both ways. I cannot disprove ghosts because so many people have experiences and perceptions where they've encountered what they would call ghosts, but then they can't prove to me that they've had that experience. So that's kind of the role of a paranormal researcher, is to try and find, sort of document the experiences that people are having as they're having them, so that we can prove it independent of the person having the experience. So you can say, yes, we've actually captured that experience on camera or on phone with our devices. But one of the ones that we never found a full explanation for, that we could prove, we were at a private investigation at a home where people had been having paranormal experiences, and there was a lot of, most of the team was in one bedroom where someone had been having experiences, and I was sitting in the lounge watching the feeds on the video monitor. So I knew that there was something happening in the room with people, because they were sort of spending a long time in the room. And I had a recorder in there, so I was recording all of the audio that was occurring in that room. And what it turned out is there was a conversation happening with something that was answering by tapping on the wall. And so people in the room would ask a question and they would get a tap. And it wasn't just random tapping, it was intelligent. It spelled out a name. They went through the alphabet, A, B, C, sort of asking it to tap when it got to the letters. And they got it to spell out the name Jonathan Lockley. And that seems very odd, the fact that it was that specific. They got details on I went to a local school and all this kind of stuff, and all these knocking noises were recorded on the recorder. You can hear a very faint tap. And we don't have an explanation for that. I mean, perhaps it was someone pulling a prank on us, potentially. We weren't aware of anyone else being on the property at the time. As far as we knew, all the people who were in the property were either together in that room, and I was separate in a different room, but I certainly wasn't knocking on the walls, and one of the cameras was pointed at me so they could see I was waiting, sitting on the couch monitoring the video feeds. So it was something that I couldn't immediately explain unless someone had fabricated it, and as far as we're aware, none of the team there fabricated it. So it seems like a very specific, intelligent response to questions. And so I found that one quite interesting. I can't say that I've actually had any bad experiences. I mean, I've visited some of the most haunted places in New Zealand. at least ones with the reputation of being haunted, the Waitomo Caves Hotel, the King Seat Mental Asylum, places like that, which have reputations of being extremely haunted. And yet I've never been to a place where I felt like there was anything malevolent or scary. Even when I was sitting by myself in one of the maximum security cells in King Seat, by this stage, of course, the hospital had been disused for many years, and so there was no power. It was pitch black. So I was basically just sitting there in the dark with a camera and an audio recorder. And I never felt any fear in there. It was sort of quite peaceful, really, just sitting there in the quiet. I mean, up until I heard a cough, and then it seemed like someone was outside, and so I went out and walked around the building and couldn't find anyone. So I thought, well, that's weird. I'm just going to check to see where everyone else was. More so out of the fact that, yes, I wanted to make sure that it wasn't one of the team there making noise. But two, I just wanted to relate to someone that I'd heard a cough from someone who wasn't there. Now, whether that was a ghost or not, I don't know. There is residential areas nearby. There are people who live on the property of King Seat, and some of the villas that are there are set up as residential. So whether it was someone going for a walk, but I can't understand why anyone would be walking near the maximum security building, because it's all fenced off like a prison pretty much in one corner of the property. So hearing a cough, and I heard it twice and had a recording of it, was strange but not scary. So yeah, I can't say that I've had any bad experiences. Common misconceptions about ghost hunters. A lot of ghost hunters aren't trying to get rid of ghosts. So there's the sort of the perception of the ghostbusters who go into someone's home and get rid of ghosts. That's generally not what we do. We don't tend to try and get rid of ghosts, since our primary purpose is to try and understand the paranormal. So we don't want to banish ghosts or anything like that. In fact, if anything, we want to sort of invite them into, so that we can capture evidence of what's happening. So that's probably the top misconception, is that we sort of are getting rid of ghosts. And I suppose the other misconception is that a lot of paranormal investigators come from a spiritual background in terms of their beliefs. When, in my experience, paranormal investigators tend to be a lot more down to earth in terms of looking for rational explanations rather than assuming everything is a ghost and trying to prove it. We're mostly trying to understand what's happening rather than trying to prove that everything's a ghost. Does it have on me as a person? Well, it brings me interesting sort of alternate perspectives on things. So I'm a business analyst by profession, so most of my time is spent working with numbers and things that are sort of very concrete and real world. So for me, it makes it for an interesting change to try and deal with things that are slightly more out there and not number driven such, although I do try and apply my experience and my training that I have in my job to the paranormal, in terms of looking for ways to collect data that can be analysed to look for trends, and so it's kind of like a source of data for me. What opinions I think people should have? It's a bit of a loaded question, because the opinions of people, the opinions I think people should have would be my own, but of course that's not their opinions, that's my opinion. So people can have whatever opinions they like about the paranormal. What I would prefer is that people be educated about the paranormal and understand it, and sort of want to learn more about it, and not treat it as some sort of taboo subject, and accept it for what it is, and accept it for each person depending on how they believe and how they perceive it. So I don't think I want to impose my opinions on anyone in that regard. It's not like the television. It's not like what you see on TV. A lot of people believe that ghost hunting is pretty much what you see on the television, but of course that's very much a heavily condensed and edited version of what's happening. Actual paranormal investigations are a lot of sitting around in the dark waiting for something to happen, and a lot of the time nothing happens, and so you can go through an entire investigation and absolutely nothing will happen, and that's not necessarily a waste of time. It just means that nothing happened at that time, so it's not something you can turn on and off like a switch, and we don't. Whereas on television you can edit things around and make things look a lot more dramatic than they actually are, add a bit of spooky music to it, and suddenly you've managed to make an entire TV show out of something which involved a paranormal team spending 6 hours doing not very much, because nothing actually happened, but it makes for 30 minutes of compelling television. So that would be the one takeaway, is it's definitely not like what you see on TV.